Bangladesh-European Union future relationship. Um, this relationship has developed in many ways since the country got its independence 50 years ago. It was a very troublesome independence since it came out of a genocide perpetrated against the Bangladeshi people, a genocide that unfortunately is not yet fully recognized, and it is a top issue. But contrarily to a lot of expectations that thought of Bangladesh as being a lost case, the contrary happens. And Bangladesh has been developing tremendously. And it is actually the best pupil in class if we look at South Asia as a whole. South Asia is, most of the people are not very conscious of what South Asia is. It is, in rough terms, it is the Indian subcontinent, which is by far the most populous part of the world. Its biggest country, India, is now the biggest country in the world. It is fundamental from a variety of points of view, but sometimes people in Europe are not really conscious of its importance and are not conscious of the importance of the fact that this country, Bangladesh, that was supposed to be a lost case, is actually the lighthouse now. It's the one that is performing the best. If we just do not take in as very important, the Maldives. The Maldives are an archipelago that is very small, not comparable with the hundreds of millions of people that live in the three biggest countries, India, Bangladesh, and Pakistan. So Bangladesh is really tremendously important. And so we thought about highlighting this a bit for mostly a European audience, but of course, it is also an audience that will cover Bangladesh and other countries. And so to do it, we were very fortunate to find two fantastic experts that I happened to meet in different capacities and circumstances. Manzoor Haq, who is perhaps the most European or the most international of the Bangladeshis I know, although I do know a lot of them. And he will be the starting point. He is a consultant. He is many things. He is now directing most of his energies to assist a defense think tank in Bangladesh. But I do not know everything he knows about. But I've been learning a lot from him on Sri Lanka, on Mozambique, on a lot of other places, and he has a lot of ideas and experiences on what are the issues related to the Bangladesh-European Union relations. We will most likely start by trade, but we will not stay there. Well, Dr. Willem van der Guest is Dutch national, but he has also been a bit all over the world. He worked in international institutions like the United Nations in New York. He has been a professor here in Brussels, actually in the French, not the Flemish speaking, the French speaking section of the Brussels University, which I found always interesting, to see how a Dutch that is supposed to be more geared to the Flemish community, as he got into the French speaking, and he has been a bit all over. I mean, he sent me his abstract. It's a bit difficult to get into all the details, and we have met when he was in that direction of the European Asian Studies Institute. And he has been a consultant on a variety of issues and countries. Sustainable development is his main dish, and he has been working on a lot of countries, but Bangladesh has been perhaps, and he will correct me if I'm wrong, the most important of them all, where he has concentrated his energies. So, for starting this conversation, we will have two interventions from both from Manzoor and Willem for a short period of time, and then the conversation will just develop, and we will address whatever issue that is thought to be more important. So, without further delay, I would now give immediately the floor to Manzoor. He is speaking to us from Dhaka. Please, Manzoor, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Paulo. Ladies and gentlemen, viewers, everybody, I would like to begin by thanking South Asia Democratic Forum and Paulo Casace for giving me this opportunity to share some of my thoughts on the future of Bangladesh-European relations. And I would like to emphasize right at the beginning that these are my own personal opinions and not related to any organization that I may or may not be associated with. As Paulo mentioned, I happen to be an advisor to the Bangladesh Navy think tank, but by the by, these views are my own. And these have been shaped by working in and living, I dare say, as in countries like Ghana in West Africa and Sri Lanka at the height of the civil war from 2004 to 2007, and also having worked in places like Afghanistan, which was interesting, to say the least. I must admit that I was a little hesitant when asked to speak, for I recognize that my thoughts and views are often controversial. Not always, but often controversial. And then I found that my co-speaker was going to be Dr. Willem. And oh my God, I was nervous. And then I thought back to a few months ago when somebody called me a gadfly. And I had always thought that a gadfly was a particular type of fly that you find on mules and animals. And then I discovered that there is a second meaning. And a gadfly is a person who annoys or criticizes others in order to provoke them into action. And I said, that may not be too far wrong where I'm concerned. So here goes. Today, I'm going to talk about non-tariff barriers. And before I move to the specific two examples of non-tariff barriers, I would like to give a bit of background as to how, in my opinion, these non-tariff barriers are created. And this is about perceptions. As Paulo said, Bangladesh was expected to fail. Somebody famous had said, bottomless basket. But that has not been the case. Despite that, in the Western world, we see that how do I put this? That Bangladesh is still regarded as the country where natural disasters, floods, and cyclones are the norm, not taking into account the fact that we have moved a lot since 1970, when that devastating cyclone on the 12th of November took place, and we lost 500,000 dead. Now, the government and the people of Bangladesh have a system of volunteers whereby millions of people are moved out of the path of cyclones in a matter of hours, 24 to 36 hours. Early warning system goes into it. That is something. Paolo, if you could tell me how much time I have left, otherwise I do tend to ramble on.
Continue. You are quite in your time. You have more than 5 minutes, please.
Okay, thank you. The second bit of perceptions, and this has been driven, I think, by the success of Bangladesh in the garments trade, is that Bangladesh is now being looked at as a kind of low cost alternative to China. That if people are moving out of China, this thing. But is that only what Bangladesh has to offer the world? I would beg to differ. We are a young country with a young population, and we are trying to do our best. We are not a small country. But in our efforts to expand, we find we face this perceptions issue, which leads me to what I call the non-tariff barriers. I will mention only two. The first one is visas. In the period from November 2021 to November 2022, a period of 13 months, I applied for and received visas to the Schengen area 3 times. And each time was a single entry visa. It is very difficult for a businessman if I have to then plan everything over a long period, staying away from home base. And I have 2 home bases, one in the UK, one in Bangladesh. And it is challenging for a businessman. If you look at the ease of doing business with which the Wall Street Journal publishes, Bangladesh is way down there, and Europe is way up there. But when they publish that, do they take into account the fact that somebody like myself, the ease of business does not even begin to apply if I cannot even get into the country? Then let us turn to having got into the country. In this day and age, a second factor is opening bank accounts. And that can turn into a nightmare. If you look at some of the major European banks, you will find that for online banking, Bangladesh is not even there. When it asks for your country of domicile, and in the Asia Pacific region, India is there, some other countries are there, but Bangladesh is not there. And then you apply for it, and then you get stuck in paperwork. And it takes a very, very long time. So, that being the case, if I turn the perception thing around, Bangladesh is moving very fast with its infrastructure development. And we have, over the next 10 years, I don't know, we have tens of billions of dollars worth of infrastructure projects in the pipeline. But I'm not aware of any Western company which is bidding for any of those jobs. And again, it's back to perceptions. And we are left with a situation where it is mostly China and Chinese companies which are bidding for these jobs. And what can we do? That is the reality. India is there to a lesser extent, Korea is there, etc. But no European companies, at least that I'm aware of. So this narrative has to change. And that can only change with more people-to-people interaction, with more flow of goods and ideas and everything that you can think of, so that we can all go forward together. And especially with the European Union, which is a major partner for Bangladesh, we would need to work and see how we can mitigate and rectify these issues. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Manzoor. I think that you really touched the chord. I mean, I think that the European Union, well, as an institution, but Europeans in general, they do not really understand the importance of the whole of this subcontinent and Bangladesh, that is now the most dynamic part of it and the most successful as well. I think you are absolutely right on starting by this sort of context is fundamental. I think that I always militated for Erasmus Mundi, which is a program that is exactly backing interchange of young students. It is really the most important instrument in this regard. And I think that Europe should understand what's going on, because the dynamics are there more than in any other part of the world. I am absolutely convinced. And if the European Union and we don't understand, well, okay. But this is perhaps the challenge I will raise to Willem. So, Willem, you have been, a bit all over the world, as I said before. You have been teaching economics in several decades, from last century to this century. You have been working on building the sustainable development framework within the United Nations. You have been working with the European Union exactly for the building the trade relationship with Bangladesh. You have been really all over, and how would you tackle this issue of where are we, European Union and Bangladesh, and where should we go to?
Right. Well, Paulo, thank you very much. Manzoor, thank you very much. Now, come back to some of the points, Manzoor, you raised very pertinently. But first, I'll say a few things about EU-Bangladesh relations, because I think that is a subject that doesn't actually get as much public discourse or debate or understanding as it deserves. So, from the start, having expensive first-hand experience in Bangladesh in different contexts, I think I remain very optimistic about EU-Bangladesh relations. But it's not a naive optimism. If I look into the future, it's not that I see a beautiful, clear sky, blue sun. No, I do see quite some clouds on the horizons as well. And, whether these clouds will, get worse from rains or storms, or whether they'll be dispersed and eventually we'll see that clear sky. That is really the question I would like to discuss. So, one of the clouds I see, although it's very good news for the country, is of course the LDC graduation, because it will come at some cost to business and economic relations. Another one is, this big challenge that Bangladesh has had for decades. Ever since I first worked in Bangladesh, I know this issue about public administration, in particular tax administration. Revenues are very low. Expenditures are therefore far too limited compared to what the needs are. And what is spent, a fair share of that doesn't reach those that need it most, but goes to people who don't really need it. So this issue of targeting. Then Bangladesh has this challenge of countering extremism. There's this draconian Digital Security Act, which needs to be reformed. And of course, there are the big development challenges of, improving education, upgrading the health system, dealing with climate change. So there are lots of clouds. And of course, in the short run, this year is a bad year. We all know that. Now, if we talk about EU, Bangladesh, of course, size matters, right? So Bangladesh, it's not by any means a small country, but if you look at the economic size, the EU has 442 million people, but in Bangladesh 171, so it's about 3-1, not even 3-1, 2.5 times. But in terms of economic size, the EU is 41 times the size of Bangladesh. 41 times. It's a huge difference. And with that capability, the EU can get its way in terms of economy, science, technology, trade and investment. Whereas for Bangladesh, the challenge is to persuade people. You don't have that kind of leverage as the EU has. So you have to really persuade people. You have to engage them. This is very good. And Mansour is obviously, very good at it. I could see that, where he engaged us already with these examples of visas and opening bank accounts, are very practical things that anybody running a business, anybody running an operation, you need to get over those kind of hurdles. So, as Paulo said, I have been observing Bangladesh from very close quarters. First, when I worked in 1984 to 86 as a young economist with the Bangladesh Planning Commission, which was at that time, which is the Porikalpana Mantranalaya. It was part of the Ministry of Planning at that time. And I worked on a project by the UNDP to assist the General Economic Member of the Planning Commission to formulate the country's third 5-year plan that ran from 85 to 90. Our task was kind of technical, making projections, calculations, while the actual writing of the plan and its key purpose, which is to allocate resources across sectors and across projects, that was fully controlled by the member and by his hierarchy, the Minister of Planning. First it was Abdul Majid Khan, and later it was Saiduzaman. And of course, ultimately it was all controlled by the president at that time, Mohammed Rashad, who was the head of this Economic Coordinating Committee. So at that time, EU-Bangladesh was really in a very nascent stage. It didn't really exist. In fact, the EU itself didn't exist in the way we have it today. It was primarily a development cooperation partnership, which had been formally signed in 76, based on the starting of diplomatic relations in 73. And the key objective at that time of the third 5-year plan and the government was to attract resources from the big players, donors, and in particular also the World Bank. And, the country was still very poor. There was this enormous overhang of destroyed infrastructure in the war and other huge problems. So if we look back today, compared to how it was 30 to 40 years ago, we see a dramatic evolution. And, at that time, working there in the mid-80s, it was inconceivable that Bangladesh would be a major supplier to the EU, even for one sector. And I recall very vividly that we made some projections for the textile sector at that time, showing that exports could go up in the next 5 years by about 3 times. People laughed at us. They didn't believe it, right? But we had seen that Bangladesh had adopted rules on the EPZ at that time, customs rules, which allowed duty-free imports of those goods that are needed for the RMG sector. And that was really the start of this enormous success that we have seen. Selective import liberalization and creating these warehouses. So if we look back to today, the relationship between the EU and Bangladesh is still based on a cooperation agreement from 2001. Paolo, you may have been in Parliament at that time when it was discussed, and you will remember. It's a so-called third generation agreement. So first generation is development cooperation, second generation is economic and trade, and third generation incorporates also fundamental human rights as part of the agreement. It really underpins the agreement. And if you look at that agreement, it shows how things have changed. At that time, it was signed by the Minister of Commerce, not Minister of Foreign Affairs or the Office of the Prime Minister. No, it was the Minister of Commerce, Abdul Jalil, who signed. And on the European side, it was Chris Patten, who was at that time the Commissioner for the European Communities, as we called it. So this is all history now, but that's how it was. So it was quite wide-ranging. Development, economics, environment, regional cooperation, science and technology. But it was also very shallow, right? If you look at the text, it just points at very specific, limited things, sometimes cultural heritage or, working closely with the WTO and stuff like that. So it was really, and much of that has happened, by the way. Bangladesh and joined quite some of these conventions on IPR, but it did not join the non-government procurement agreement for reasons, which go back to the point Mansour made, and I'll comment on that in a minute. So now back today, in 2022, we had probably a very important step forward in EU-Bangladesh relationships, which was the first political dialogue between the EU and Bangladesh, which took place in November 2022. And that's why I'm optimistic, because I think that relationship, that process could be, a catalyst for closer relationships, not only at the diplomatic or bureaucratic level, but also in terms of the EU advocating changes in Bangladesh in a joint platform, right, with Bangladesh and in Bangladesh. And we see that it's quite important. Sometimes you need external forces to make changes. If you look at the current episode about the RAP, if the US had not done these sanctions, probably these positive results that we have now seen over the last year, that extrajudicial killings have kind of stopped, and the RAP is under control to some extent, as it wasn't previously. That is really because of this kind of external forces. And so we need a kind of combination of both internal and external forces to get a number of those reforms that I talked about, like in public administration, to get them going. Now, for the future, I'm also optimistic because the answer to, graduation means loss of preferences, but the answer is there. If Bangladesh could be a GSP plus country, which means a very firm commitment to effectively implementing a wide range of, principles on human rights, on labor, on environment, good governance, then that would be a catalyst for a very good development, both from the Bangladesh point of view, sustainable development, but also from the EU point of view. Because, it is true, not 100%, but it is true what Mansour says, that EU business still shuns, and US for that matter, still shuns Bangladesh. The percentage of FDI inflow is one of the lowest in Asia, even though, as you say correctly, the growth is there. And investors are worried about corruption. They're worried about a lack of legal certainty. That's why they're not coming. Or if they come, they just buy an existing business rather than new investment and new sectors. So this is really a problem. And of course, the IMF, now we have the IMF loan, which Bangladesh didn't really need as such. It's only 4.7 billion, is actually not a big deal. But the reason the IMF loan may be beneficial and why I supported this, because that kind of external pressure may bring about some of those internal changes that the government, for all kinds of reasons, vested interests and so on, finds difficult to make. So a little bit from help from abroad, a little bit of help from your friends from abroad may actually bring about some of these changes that are really needed. And then those clouds that I see on the horizon for EU Bangladesh will eventually disappear. So on the very specific point, of course, it's not 100% true that there are no European companies operating in the infrastructure, because the metro rail is actually built by a coalition of Thailand and Italian company. So it's not 100% true, but it's largely true. And it's largely true because government of Bangladesh decided not to join these kind of international procurement rules. And that is why European companies will be more expensive than Indian or Chinese companies. That's for sure. But then their quality would be higher. We've seen that in Dubai. That was built by a Dutch company. Those islands in Dubai. And we have that kind of technology. In fact, it's a huge sector in the Netherlands, where I come from, as speaking here not for the EU, but for my own country, so to speak. We have huge capability in civil engineering, and that has been very widely used in Bangladesh, in water management, in dredging. But now increasingly we see that others are getting a larger share of the pie, and that doesn't worry in itself. But coming back to EU Bangladesh, this political dialogue, if that could put in shape, in form, give direction to some of these reforms, that would be a win-win for, I think, both Bangladesh and the EU. And the EU is very keen. We are very keen. It's officially said that negotiations for a new partnership agreement will start anytime soon, as soon as the government gives the green light. And in that sense, yes, we have a lot to offer. And, knowing Bangladesh firsthand over this long period of time, I think that Bangladesh has a lot to offer too. So I'm very pleased to speak on this subject and to indicate that, there is still a great deal of opportunities which haven't been missed, but which must be realized. Paolo, thank you. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Willem. So I think that we have a lot of points to discuss. I'm not even sure we will be able to tackle the whole of them. Starting by the end, of course, the Netherlands, perhaps for many centuries, perhaps even thousands of years, you have been the masters of managing water and sea invasion and things that are very meaningful for Bangladesh. So the Netherlands, I actually did not know that you have been on this project of the islands of Dubai, but it's an obvious point for future relations. But trying to organize a bit the whole of the issues raised. I mean. Of course, that I think Mansour, now the issue raised by Willem is very important. I mean, fundamentally said, well, you have to Bangladesh, now the ball is in the Bangladesh camp. So you have to see the procurement rules so that the Europeans might get there. Well, that's for you. But I have also something for Willem in the next round, which is, well, you did quite rightly point out to your prediction on Bangladesh and the textiles coming true. But now we have some forecasts predicting that after graduating, that will be in 2026, from its current least developed country statute, it Bangladesh might attain an upper middle income status by 2031, and it aims at being a fully developed country by 2041. So, do you think it's impossible, or and if it's possible, what is the meaning for Europe? So, I would perhaps take these 2 points. Getting to the issue of security, this is absolutely fundamental. How to deal with what Willem called extremism, that's really jihadists. And the problem is that they really have an organization at the world level. I have no doubts about that. And the West has been very open to their influence, and with results like Afghanistan. Afghanistan is quite a case in point of what the Islamist Qatari lobby achieved with Islamist propaganda. This is the biggest disaster I can imagine is really what is happening now in Afghanistan. And so if we are to follow this sort of recipe, I think we would really be very, very sorry. But needless to say that Bangladesh must improve its record in terms of legal rights and human rights. And what you said about RAB, it's absolutely clear that something has to be done. I'm not sure if it is the good method that was employed by the United States and if it is really impartial. But of course, something has to be done, and something is happening, as you just said. And that's very positive. And I can tell you that this is perhaps the issue that in 2023 we will accompany the most. There is a genocide to be recognized. There is a need to stop those who promoted this genocide and their organizations to come up again, threatening the Bangladesh and the whole of the continent. And of course, it has to be done in an intelligent way, safeguarding values that are essential for everyone and for Bangladeshis themselves. So, well, Manzoor, now, what do you say about this issue of the procurement rules and other things, of course, you want to refer to?
Okay. Bangladesh procurement rules are guided by something called Public Procurement Rules 2008, which the World Bank had helped develop. And most procurements have to follow these rules. And it lays out chapter and verse how the consultants are to be appointed, how the major contractors are to be appointed, and so on. This was amended again with the help of World Bank in 2010, but no further amendments have been done. And my understanding is that it is still being followed. I did wish to raise a point with that Willem had mentioned. The Thai-Italian company is actually doing the expressway. And if you're talking of metro rail, that is under JICA funding. But even the expressway has been subcontracted to 3 Chinese companies. Power China is one of those, and I forget who the others are, but they are doing it. On the metro rail has been divided into various segments and various things, but that is all Japanese funding. Whereas the expressway is under a PPP program, public-private partnership program. But going back to it, Paulo, the procurement rules 2008 as amended in 2010 is what is followed. And I believe it pretty extensively covers any questions that people may have. Of course, as they say, the proof of the pudding is in the eating, and you can have all the rules in the world and how they are implemented. But that's something that, again, becomes immaterial if the companies do not take the first step and come and bid for a job. Then only can we find out as to whether the rules are being followed. Otherwise, at the moment, we have 1, 2, 3 bidders, all are Chinese. Unfortunate, but that is what the status is.
Mm-hmm.
Fantastic, Manzoor. I really learned something. I don't know, Willem, you want to react? Of course, and the floor will be yours. I have already one question, but before getting to this question, I think that yeah, please.
Yeah, no, Manzoor is absolutely right. That these rules are there, and on the whole, European companies will not be as cheap as Chinese. But also, it is a question of quality, right? What kind of quality do you ultimately get? And that is, maybe in some cases, even following the rules, you need to set certain quality standards that are higher than those that may be offered by Chinese. But look, if they can do it cheaper, that's great. Then there's no need for European companies to be there. It is absolutely, we need to, as you said correctly, the proof is in the eating, right? So if you get the good results at a lower price, fine. But is it really the case? So we need to, these rules are there. It's good. Are they followed? Yes, they are followed. Do we get the outcomes we want? Maybe. Not always. Sometimes not. So quality is the, European business will be working on quality. That's why they, like this example I gave from Dubai, that's why they win those kind of contracts. Land reclamation would nearly certainly be done very well by Dutch companies. Generation of power certainly be done very well by German and Swiss companies, Swedish companies. So they have a lot to offer, but it's not going to come cheap. So maybe, it comes from India. Some of the big European companies operate from an Indian regional base these days. For example, Schindler, the lift maker, operates from Pune, no longer from Austria. So there's a kind of, there's movement in that domain. And Schindler is still making the elevators for the new third terminal at the airport. So it's not that the Europeans aren't there, but it's international business and it works in its own mysterious ways sometimes. That's very good. On visa, yeah, I feel very strongly about that. And of course, I don't know, Manzoor, whether your situation got worse because of Brexit. Is that indirectly affecting you as a UK resident, or is it because if you get for one country, say Belgium, and then you're actually not allowed to even cross the border to Netherlands or Germany, that's crazy. That's useless, right? And here I think and this is also a bilateral issue, although it's Schengen, it's also a bilateral issue. Here, EU countries should be mobilized to give business visas roughly the same like the US does, where you can have a 3 or 5 year business visa. And that should be the kind of window for people like yourself who operate in both Bangladesh and Europe. And that could be advocated. That could be one point on the agenda for sure with this EU-Bangladesh political dialogue. It's a big issue. And good solutions were there also for the UK. The UK had very good types of visas. And some of that should be emulated by the EU as well. Absolutely, I agree. It's ridiculous if you have to spend days and days and days in getting a visa just for one trip. I fully agree. And I see a note kind of from Siegfried Wolf. The EU interested in expanding its footprint in the Asian regions to its Indo-Pacific strategy. Yeah, of course. I mean, EU-Bangladesh is not just a bilateral relationship. It fits in the bigger picture of Indo-Pacific strategy. So I would, agree with that. But of course, we need to elaborate it in more detail, right? For Bangladesh, looking at it from Bangladesh angle, of course, we have India and China, two big neighbors. And it's essential that relationships with those neighbors are good in terms of economics and trade and security. That's really essential for being with both. Sometimes the risk of some of these strategies, as they're being pushed by big players from the outside, is that they want kind of exclusivity. That is, I think, that would be that Bangladesh would need to consider that very carefully. But at present, I feel the country is managing quite well to keep a balance in good relationships with India, but also with others in Southeast Asia and East Asia, Japan in particular. So yeah, I think that is what a small country needs to do. That's what we did in the Netherlands before we had the EU. We were always talking to everybody, and indeed, our government is still talking to everybody today, including the US and African countries, etc. So that is a small country problem that you need to deal with many players at the same time and try to remain in balance with all of them. Okay, over to you, Paulo or
Thank you.
Manzoor.
Thank you, Willem. So we as a matter of fact, have some questions that are raised by Dr. Zippe Wolf that I think that you have access to them directly on. Willem already referred to one of them. These are very, very good things to tackle. This issue of human relations, it's really very, very interesting, because I most likely the European Union is not able to really to understand how important it is to have personal relations. I mean, of course there are a lot of migration coming to the European Union from South Asia and in particular from Bangladesh, but other than this, what Manzoor said, I think it's absolutely vital, and we have to understand this. Without, we are humans, and before anything else, rules, trade, objects, humanity is really the most important thing. So we can now come back to Manzoor. I don't know if you want to what do you think about this this challenge that was raised by the ambassador to Bangladesh from the European Union, Charles Whitley. What could be the Bangladesh role in this so-called Indo-Pacific strategy? Sometimes it's a bit of a jargon. I don't know if you want to elaborate on this as well.
Well, I think as Willem mentioned, and then you followed up, Bangladesh needs to be very careful, and I believe they're following now a dual track policy, and we have to manage. The only little point that I would differ with Willem on is that I think he mentioned Bangladesh is a small country. Yes, geographically we are a small country, but a country of 165 to 170 million people can never really be regarded as small. And with our graduating to lower middle income status in 2026, I would argue that we are an aspiring middle power, maybe at the lower end of it, but we are an aspiring middle power. So amongst ourselves first, we need to have a lot of discussion and ideas exchanged before we decide how it is going to be. But I do not think that we would be jumping into any camp to the exclusion of the other.
Yeah, that's really. I think that is,
Please, Willem.
what I think is very important for. Let me take away the small country. Yes, you're not a small country with 171 million people. You're a little bit small, right? You're big. But I meant comparatively small compared to those big players like India, China, with huge populations, huge economies. And I've seen it in another. That was actually truly a small country, Armenia, where I worked as advisor, directing the EU advisory group to the government. And there, we saw already at that time, 2011, how the Russian Federation used its power to stop Armenia developing relations with the EU. This is on record, and we know it. We know it today from Ukraine. We know it from Georgia. But it was happening all over the region. That it was gas power. It was they said in Moscow, we'll raise the price if you don't become a little bit more friendly towards the Russian Federation and join the Eurasian Union, which was to the exclusion of therefore not being able to enter into certain trade agreements with the EU. So we know that sometimes big powers try to force their way through, and that is nearly always disadvantageous for the smaller ones. Not small, comparatively small. Thank you. Yes,
Yeah.
it's really a key point. And I think on the whole, if I, the current government, but also previous governments, they consciously started to look east, roughly about 25 years ago, and integrating more with Southeast Asia, ASEAN, and also, of course, building on the relations with China and Japan and Korea. We see it happening elsewhere in the region, in Asia. It's like, for example, Vietnam. Vietnam has very close relationships with South Korea, and it's codified even in the trade agreements and investment agreements. And much of the success of Vietnam as a country is because of this resources from South Korea. South Korea itself in 1950s was nowhere. It was a really poor country. Now it's upper middle income country, and indeed a member of the OECD. It's a rich country today. So it is possible. It's possible for Bangladesh. It is possible for Malaysia. It's happening in Malaysia. I see many Bangladeshis working in Malaysia in the IT industry, making chips or cars or whatever it is. This could happen in Bangladesh as well. It's definitely possible. That's why I'm an optimist. I see it as possible, but there are these challenges, and they need to be negotiated. They need to be addressed. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Willem. That's a very very optimistic in the end. I think I see that in your view, still the blue sky prevails over clouds. You mentioned Vietnam. It's I actually have never been there in Vietnam, and I've been. But anyway, Vietnam is certainly not a democratic country, and I have been seeing how the European Union has been, much more open to develop relations and actually agreements with Vietnam than, for instance, than Bangladesh. Don't you think that this really reveals a lack of importance given to South Asia? Because the issue is, of course, the Southeast Asia is more advanced, more developed on a variety of points of view, but the wave is there. I think I can see it, and South Asia will be really the big thing. And don't you think we really should look at it, listening perhaps more in depth to what our Bangladeshi friends have to say, to their points of view? What do you think about that?
Yeah, and I say we are doing so. I'm sure we have a very good ambassador. We had a very good ambassador, a Dutch lady before. We've given a lot of priority and interest to Bangladesh. It's not that South Asia equals India. No, it's not like that. We have also given a lot of priority on Pakistan, on Sri Lanka. Of course, those two countries had these huge security issues, which makes things more complex and more difficult. The civil war in Sri Lanka, the Afghanistan issue that you already raised. So, fortunately, in Bangladesh, we don't have those kind of problems. Although Bangladesh is a kind of what shall I say? I mean, has is indirectly affected by the Myanmar situation. 1 million people, already 171, another 1 million people. That is no joke. And that region, I've been in the camps in South Chittagong. That region is really very, very much affected also from an environmental point of view. Can it cope with that kind of inflow? What is the future for these people? Integration is nearly, it's a huge task, nearly impossible. Going back, also nearly impossible. What's the for this Rohingyas? What is the future? So I think the international community has, acknowledged that Bangladesh has done a lot. There are other cases. I mean, Turkey has so many refugees today from Syria. Tanzania used to have so many refugees from Rwanda. It's not that it's a unique case. It's unfortunately not a unique case, but it's at least there's no doubt that the international community, including the European Union, has given a lot of support to Bangladesh to at least deal with the situation as it is, the very unfortunate situation, the spilling over from the civil war within Myanmar. So yeah,
we are approaching already our end. You are touching a very very important point. Yes, I actually had the privilege some years ago to go to wander around the Chittagong hill tracks in areas that normally are out of reach for security reasons. And well, to start with, it's absolutely gorgeous and marvelous from the touristic point of view, that's for sure. And then, of course, I have been as well in this area that, as you just mentioned, among various other things. I mean, it has been environmentally completely destroyed, this area between Cox's Bazar and the border with Thailand and with Myanmar. And of course, I've been as well on the other side of the border, and I tried to see what could be done, and things do not really seem very good from this perspective. But here, I really have to say, I mean, Bangladesh is really an example to us all. What Bangladesh has been doing regarding the refugees from Myanmar is something that, unfortunately, was not done by Europe regarding, for instance, the refugees of Syria. And in terms of human rights, just to mention this issue that is very sensitive. I mean, I've been there. I understood very well what happens there, and of course, not saying that it's all fantastic. And I know about, for instance, what's going on in the Turkish-Greek border. And really, for instance, in this point, I think Europeans should think twice before aiming at giving lessons to anyone. They have a lot more to be concerned with indoors than they think, and that's very objective. And whoever knows the situations and cares for human rights knows what I'm saying. Well, but we are winding up. So, Manzur, now it's your turn. What do you think about this optimism with caveat that Willem portrayed?
Well, I can look at it both ways because if you recall, I trained as a pathologist, and we were told that a physician knows everything, does nothing. Surgeon knows nothing and does everything. A pathologist knows everything and does everything, but it's too late. But yes, for me, I'm a great believer in Willem's positive looking outlook. And for me, the glass is never half empty. The glass is always half full. And yes, we will have challenges. We will have problems. Who doesn't? But I'm sure with the support of friends like you, Willem, and you, Paulo, we shall make progress and we shall be able to overcome these road bumps as and when they occur. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mansoor. That was really something. Yeah, I think that you have a lot of sense of humor. It's well, it's Bangladeshi with some UK flavor, I think. That was really something. Well. Willem, what have you say to this pathologist?
Well, I'm thinking what if pathologists say this, what do economists say? So economists are not always optimistic. In fact, one of the leading economists is known as Dr. Doom because he always predicts a crisis, and sooner or later he's right. But no, in this particular case, when I worked there back 40 years ago now, nearly 40 years ago, a rickshawala, he was paid 5 taka. That was it, and maybe he just did 4 or 5 jobs in a day. Even that today, now young guys are driving Ubers all over Dhaka. It's it's a major change. And, still they don't make so much, they don't, but they have a, decent living, dignified living at least. They're not, well off by any standard, but they can get by. And that is a major change that has happened over this period of time. And this must continue. We must really build on that. And of course, the biggest challenge is education, to have more skills. In business, you'll find it very difficult to get a good accountant, or you'll find it very difficult to get people in the construction industry that understand an Excel sheet. These kind of skills that are essential for higher productivity, they need to be built. That's a very important challenge. That's the most fundamental challenge, I believe, amidst all these others that I have mentioned. But I remain positive because I see also solutions coming forward. When needed, there are solutions. So therefore, I remain positive and optimistic. Paulo, over to you.
Well, I think we have really two wonderful major conversation makers as we can rarely meet. I'm very, very thankful for both of you for your contributions. It has been, a very loose conversation. We spoke about everything. It's very difficult. I am thinking, normally we make a summary in the end. It's very difficult to make a summary of what we just. I don't know if we are going to skip the pathologist part, but in a nutshell, I think the glass is half full. Challenges are there, improvements are needed for sure. We have to make sure that we don't kill the patient, of course. That some of the solutions are really the biggest disasters. As once again, Afghanistan is there to show that things can really go very badly if we really do not know what we are doing. But I share your optimism. What you said about the Uber drivers and the rickshaw, it's very telling. I mean, the dynamics of Bangladesh. I mean, each time I go to Bangladesh, I mean, I say, what? I mean, this flyover, there was nothing there, last time. I mean, everything is changing at an enormous speed, an enormous speed. And this is what I think is more important, to understand these dynamics. Of course, to try to have a positive impact, but fundamentally, what we need now is to strengthen the dialogue. From this point of view, I think, Mansour, you got the point. I mean, it's exactly what you said. We must perhaps, we try to lobby, to have, an Erasmus Mundi Bangladesh multiplied by 10, and to have a different approach in terms of human relations, and to allow these techniques to go. What you said about water from the Netherlands, management of waters, dikes, and so on, it's quite true. What you said about renewable energies, I think it is a matter of knowledge. I think that the moment that the knowledge flows, I mean, we don't need to make any speech about climate change. It's just to realize it's more economic, more efficient. Bangladesh has a lot to offer, especially in terms of sun, and that's what we should implement immediately. It's more productive. It's better for everyone than making any coal thermal power station. I think this is a dreadful idea, but we have to come to answer this, by allowing people to flow. The technologies, solutions, they are there, and I think Bangladesh will be a better country, and I think the European Union can benefit a lot from an improved and strengthened relationship with Bangladesh. So both of you, thank you so much. Let's see, we will make just a small summary, 2 or 3 things, and we are looking forward to our future cooperation, and see how can we contribute to improve this relation between the European Union and Bangladesh. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thank you very much.